Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
You'd think that by 34, a birthday would stop meaning anything, that the candles and the cake, the singing, and the awkward photo taking would all fade into something soft, silly, and forgettable. You'd think I'd grow past it, but I didn't. Not because I wanted presents or some huge celebration. Hell, all I wanted this year was to sit down with the people who raised me and feel like just for one night, I mattered. I made the reservation myself. A little place in town, Italian, cozy lighting, the kind of spot that smells like real butter and old red wine. I picked it because my mom once said it reminded her of her honeymoon. My dad liked the breadsticks. And Melanie, well, Melanie never paid attention to anything unless it directly concerned her, so I knew she'd be fine. I'd even called the place ahead to ask if they could bring out a small cake after dinner. I told them not to write my name on it, not to sing, just something discreet. They all showed up late, 15 minutes. I sat at the table alone, watching the hostess pretend not to glance at me while she bussed menus to other tables. When my parents finally arrived, my mom smiled like nothing had happened. My dad mumbled something about traffic, and Melanie breezed in behind them in a suede jacket she absolutely couldn't afford, her face glowing from the flash of a selfie she'd just taken outside. I smiled, of course. I always smile. I smiled while they took their seats, smiled when they asked what was good on the menu, smiled when no one mentioned it was my birthday. We ordered. The usual family chatter started, updates on distant cousins I barely remembered, neighborhood gossip from their street back in Crestwood, a few casual digs at Melanie's ex, who'd apparently moved in with a girl 10 years younger. It wasn't until after the entrees had been cleared that Melanie pulled out her phone, distracted, and said, "Oh, I almost forgot," like she'd suddenly remembered she left the oven on. My mother gasped, touched her chest like she'd been waiting for this part. She reached into her purse and brought out a little black box, placed it in front of Melanie like it was sacred, and said softly, "We just wanted you to have something special. You've been going through so much lately." I looked at the box and then at Melanie, then at my parents. Melanie opened it like it was Christmas morning. Inside was a delicate silver necklace, custom made, her initials curled in cursive. My father nodded, proud. My mother said, "We thought it might make you feel a little stronger. It's been a tough year, honey." They talked about how she deserved something nice, how resilient she was, how the breakup had been brutal. No one looked at me, not once. No one said happy birthday. No one even glanced at the cake that never came out, because no one reminded the waiter when I didn't. I let it die right there, buried under a pile of untouched dessert menus. I sat there while Melanie beamed and showed off the necklace under the warm yellow light. I stared at the box and tried to figure out what it would have felt like, even once in my life, to be the one who needed comforting. But I didn't cry. That part's important. I didn't cry, didn't break, didn't make a scene. I just smiled, nodded, made some polite remark about how pretty it was, then reached into my purse, pulled out my card, and handed it to the waiter without a word. My dad flinched. "You don't have to," I cut him off gently. "It's on me." Melanie laughed. "Perks of being the rich one, right?" I stood up. "Sure, perks." And I left. I walked out slowly, without slamming anything or raising my voice. I stepped into the night air, cool and dry, and let the door close behind me. I didn't even look back. I drove home in silence. No music, no calls, no tears. I turned off my phone when it buzzed. It was probably my mom texting, pretending she just remembered what day it was, but it was already too late. The next morning, I opened my laptop, logged into my bank account, and transferred the last chunk of savings into escrow. I'd been working for years to pull it off, flipping small units, building up equity, scrimping on everything from new shoes to dental work. And now, finally, it was time. My first apartment sold at a clean profit. I didn't tell anyone, not my mom, not my dad. Definitely not Melanie. Instead, I sat in my kitchen, coffee in hand, sunlight pouring in through the cheap blinds, and I whispered to myself, happy birthday. It was the first time I meant it, and the last time I let them forget me. The first week was easy. You'd be surprised how quickly your body adapts to silence, how naturally your fingers stop reaching for the phone when you finally decide that no answer is better than another empty apology. I didn't announce anything. There was no dramatic social media post, no final message, no declaration of boundaries or mental health breaks. I just vanished, quietly, like dust settling after a storm. At first, they didn't even notice, or if they did, they pretended not to. A couple of calls rolled in, nothing frantic, just the kind you leave while waiting in a grocery line. A "how are you" from my mom that felt like an obligation. A "just checking in" from my dad, as if we'd spoken yesterday. Melanie didn't call at all. That part didn't surprise me. She never did unless she needed something, and I had made myself completely unavailable. I stopped answering texts. I left voicemails unheard. I ignored invitations to family dinners, baby showers for people I barely knew, and even the annual pumpkin patch trip that I had somehow become the driver for over the last 5 years. I let it all rot in the silence I had created, and for once, I didn't feel guilty about it. Instead, I poured myself into work. Long hours turned into longer ones. The apartment I had flipped brought in a clean return, better than I expected, and that gave me breathing room. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. Brick by metaphorical brick, I was putting up walls where none had existed before. Walls to keep out the noise, the guilt, and the gaslighting that had passed for love in my family for as long as I could remember. The thing about growing up as the stable one is that you start to believe you owe people your stability, that your job is to hold the rope while everyone else swings, that you have no right to fall apart or ask for anything. I was the one who paid my way through school. I was the one who fixed things when the plumbing broke in my parents' house. I was the one who picked Melanie up after her 3rd DUI, after she'd sobbed into the phone and promised me it wasn't her fault. I was the one who helped her clean out her apartment when her ex left, even though she never once returned the favor when I moved. I was the one they leaned on when they wanted peace, and the one they ignored when I needed space. The irony is, the more I disappeared, the more I could finally hear myself. I started taking walks again, the long kind that lead nowhere in particular. I rewatched movies I hadn't seen since college, made meals from scratch, sat in my silence like it was a cathedral. And in that space, I started to realize that I had been trained to crave crumbs. Every minor compliment from my mother, every rare thank you from my father, every smirk from Melanie that wasn't followed by an insult. I had treated all of it like gold, but it wasn't gold, it was scraps. And I wasn't hungry anymore. Olivia, my oldest friend, noticed. She called 3 times in 1 week before I finally picked up. "You okay?" she asked. Her voice edged with worry, but not pity. I told her I was. I told her everything, actually, from the dinner to the necklace to the silence. She didn't say I was overreacting. She didn't tell me to forgive them. She just said, "About time." Then she paused and added, "You know, I've been thinking. Maybe it's not that they forgot your birthday. Maybe they've just always remembered Melanie's pain more than your presence." That sentence sat in my chest like a stone. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. 2 weeks later, I got a voicemail from my mother. It was different from the others. There was no chipper tone, no pretending she was just checking in. Her voice was shaking, almost breathless, like someone who had finally realized they were lost without a map. She said, "Erin, I don't know what to say anymore. I need you to come home. Please, there's something we need to talk about." She didn't cry often. I could count the times on one hand. She was the kind of woman who only allowed herself to break down behind closed doors, or when she thought no one could hear. So for her to leave that message, to let her voice crack on a recorded line, meant something. I just didn't know what yet. I didn't call back right away. I saved the voicemail, listened to it twice, then turned off my phone again. I sat at my kitchen table and stared out the window, watching the light change on the buildings across the street. My instincts were split. part of me wanted to rush back, to solve whatever new mess they had created. The other part, the new part, the one I was just starting to trust, stayed very still. It said, wait. It said, don't move until you know exactly where you're stepping. And while I waited, a quiet truth slipped into my mind and settled there, undeniable and cold. If she had started crying now, 3 months after the dinner, it wasn't because she missed me. It was because something had gone wrong again. Something I wasn't supposed to know about. But I would. Soon, I told myself I wasn't going to do it. I told myself I would listen to that voicemail, store it, forget it, and let time do what time always does. Cover the raw parts with something that looks like healing, even if it's just another form of forgetting. But 3 days after I heard her voice, trembling through the phone, I found myself in the car, driving down I-44 toward my childhood home, the one with the cracked front porch and the white siding that had needed repainting for at least a decade. The one I swore I'd never walk into again unless someone was dying or confessing. I didn't call ahead, I didn't text, I didn't even warn Olivia, who would have talked me out of it if I'd given her the chance. I just drove, windows up, music off, the kind of silence that presses against your ears like altitude. It had been years since I'd stayed away this long, and somehow the town looked smaller, like it had curled in on itself while I was gone. When I pulled into the driveway, the lights were already on, even though it was only late afternoon. My mother was standing in the front window, her silhouette framed by the same yellow curtains she'd hung back in 2007. She must have seen me coming, or maybe she'd just been waiting like that for hours, watching the street the way some people watch the tide. The door opened before I even knocked. My mother looked like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were puffy, her hair pulled back in a bun that screamed fatigue more than intention. She didn't hug me. She just stepped aside and said my name like it was both a question and a plea. My father was in the kitchen, pretending to stir something on the stove, though I doubted anything was actually cooking. That was his role in moments like these, to act like the world hadn't cracked open, to make noise with pots and pans while pretending not to hear the tension in every breath. We sat down in the living room, my mother on the edge of the recliner, me on the couch, my father leaning against the counter like he wasn't part of the conversation. She started with small talk, how work was, how the city had changed, whether I'd seen that the bakery on Main had closed. I didn't answer any of it, I just waited. And eventually the silence got too loud for her to ignore. She inhaled sharply and launched into the same monologue I'd heard all my life, about how family is complicated and how sometimes we hurt the ones we love without meaning to. She talked about how much stress they'd been under, how Melanie had been in a really dark place lately, how the dinner hadn't gone the way they'd intended. She didn't apologize for forgetting my birthday. She didn't mention the necklace. She just kept orbiting around it like it was a bruise she didn't want to press. I let her talk. I let her fill the room with excuses and almost regrets. And when she finally wound down, when the words slowed and her hands started fidgeting in her lap, I leaned back and said quietly, "So what is it? What do you really want?" That caught her. She blinked, like the question had hit her harder than expected. My father stepped forward then, rubbing the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes. He muttered something about being honest now, and I felt the first prickle of warning crawl up my spine. Then it came. They wanted me to help Melanie, again. Not emotionally, not with advice or support or some heartfelt letter. No, they wanted money, a loan technically, though we all knew how that would play out. Apparently, she was in over her head with credit cards, rent, maybe some car payments. My mother was vague, and my father didn't offer details. But they knew I had just sold my apartment. They knew I had profit, liquid funds, access. I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at my mother, this woman who had rocked me to sleep as a child, who had once made my Halloween costumes by hand, who could now sit across from me and ask for money with the same face she used to ask for salt at the dinner table. I waited for her to feel the weight of it, but she didn't. She just said, "We thought maybe you could help her get back on her feet. Just a little something to keep her from falling apart." I stood up slowly, my heart was racing, but my voice came out calm, even detached. Tell her to pawn the necklace. My mother's mouth opened, stunned, but no words came. My father finally looked at me, really looked at me, like maybe for the first time in years, he saw me not as an accessory to their lives, but as something dangerous, unpredictable, someone capable of walking away and meaning it. I turned and walked to the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't say goodbye. I got into my car, started the engine, and let myself breathe for the first time in 30 minutes. By the time I pulled back onto the highway, my phone buzzed. A text from Olivia, the only person who ever seemed to sense when I was about to burn something down. "Hey," it read, "I heard you bought something with the money. You didn't, did you?" I didn't answer, not yet, because what I bought wasn't for them, and it sure as hell wasn't for me, but it was going to change everything. When people talk about revenge, they usually imagine it in fire, loud, messy, unforgettable. But what no one tells you is that the sweetest revenge doesn't come in shouting matches or slam doors. It comes in quiet moves. In the kind of decisions no one sees coming, the kind that catch people off guard not with anger, but with the sheer, unshakable calm of someone who's finally done pretending. That's what this was for me. Not rage, not bitterness, but clarity wrapped in forward motion. The week after that last conversation with my parents, while they were still probably holding committee meetings in their kitchen about how to emotionally manipulate me into writing another check to cover Melanie's next mistake, I was signing paperwork with a woman named Cassandra, who wore bright red lipstick and spoke like every sentence was a contract. She was a broker for small commercial properties, exactly the kind of person I'd never thought I'd need to talk to until recently. We were standing inside an old bookstore cafe at the edge of the city, the kind of place that had the bones of something beautiful, even though the shelves were empty and dust curled up from the corners like forgotten history. The windows were tall and smudged. The wood floors creaked with every step, and the back wall had a quote hand-painted on it, now faded but still legible. Every chapter begins with a decision. I stood there, letting the words sink in, and I knew I had found exactly what I'd been looking for, even if I hadn't realized I'd been looking at all. The money from the apartment sale hadn't just been a win. It had been a line in the sand. I could have used it to move into a high-rise downtown, or to take a vacation across the country, disappear for a while, reset. But that kind of escape felt temporary. I didn't want escape. I wanted permanence, something of mine. Something no one could touch. So I bought the building, closed the deal within a week, and spent the next month rebuilding it with Olivia and a few contractors who worked more for the radio and coffee I provided than the actual pay. We tore out the dusty shelves, installed new lighting, polished the floors until they shone, and painted the walls in warm, earthy tones. Olivia handled the cafe design, bar seating, new espresso machines, tiny pastries that looked like art. I focused on the bookstore, curating used novels, memoirs, journals, even local author collections. We named it Chapter 1. A little cliché, maybe, but it felt fitting. It wasn't just the first chapter for the shop, it was mine too. The official opening was scheduled for late November, and I spent most of my time in the weeks leading up to it in a fog of paint fumes, spreadsheets, and the kind of exhaustion that doesn't break you but rebuilds you. I started holding small writing workshops in the evenings. Nothing formal, just a few strangers who wanted to tell stories and needed a place to do it. And strangely, it worked. People came, people stayed. People started asking about me, not who I was related to, not who I could help or what I could give, but who I was, just me. And then one afternoon, Melanie walked in. She looked different, not worse, not better, just smaller, like someone who'd been living inside a version of herself too tight to breathe in. She didn't order anything. She didn't ask for a table. She walked straight up to the counter where I was wiping down the surface and said, "This place is cute. Didn't know you had it in you." I didn't respond. I just looked at her, not with hate or resentment, but with the same gaze I'd give a stranger in line at the bank. It wasn't cold. It just wasn't warm either. That unsettled her more than if I'd screamed. She looked around, took in the shelves, the plants, the handwritten signs with quotes about strength and beginnings, and then finally said, "Mom said you've been distant." I kept wiping the counter. "I've been busy." She laughed nervously. "Yeah, she mentioned the apartment. Said you sold it and didn't tell anyone. They think you're punishing them." I finally looked up at her. "Do you think that?" She hesitated just for a second. "I think you could have said something." I nodded slowly. "So could you, on my birthday." That landed. For the first time since she walked in, she didn't have a quick reply. She shifted her weight, tugged at the sleeves of her jacket, and said, "I didn't mean to make it about me. That necklace wasn't even— Look, I didn't ask them for it." "I know," I said. "You never have to. They do it on instinct." She blinked. "That's not fair." "It's not unfair either," I said, my voice low and even. "It just is, and I'm not asking you to change it. I'm just done pretending it doesn't affect me." She stared at me like she was waiting for something, maybe a crack, maybe some leftover version of me who would cave, hug her, tell her it was all okay. Instead, I stepped out from behind the counter and pointed toward the exit. "We're not open for another hour." She hesitated, then turned and walked out without another word. That night, after closing, I found a letter slipped under the back door. It was written in my mother's handwriting, short, barely 3 lines. It read, "You're going to hate me when you find out what we did, but it was to protect your sister. We didn't think it would matter. I'm sorry." No signature, no explanation, just enough to set the room spinning, and I knew right then that there was still more beneath the surface. Still something waiting to be uncovered. And I wasn't sure I wanted to know what it was. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over you when a warning finally makes sense. When every stray look, every offhand comment, every piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit suddenly clicks into place so seamlessly that you're almost embarrassed for not having seen it sooner. That was the silence that lived in me as I stood in the back room of the bookstore, holding my mother's note in one hand, the fluorescent ceiling light flickering above me like some cheap horror film omen. I read the letter again, not because the words had changed, but because I was trying to convince myself they were real, that they had come from the woman who had raised me, braided my hair, and told me bedtime stories about kindness and loyalty. But apparently, those stories had expiration dates, and mine had quietly passed. I didn't call her. I didn't storm over. I didn't even cry. What I did was go home, pour myself a glass of water, sit down on the edge of my bathtub like it was a church pew, and start asking the kinds of questions that only come when you know. The truth is worse than the lie you've already been told. I had sold that apartment cleanly, or so I thought. I had dotted every I, read every clause, reviewed every document. It had been a straightforward sale of a renovated unit I had put everything into: time, savings, weekends of sweat, and blistered fingers. And yet now I had this letter, this warning dressed as a confession, implying that something much bigger had happened, something I wasn't supposed to notice until it was too late. The next morning, I called the title company. I used the voice I had learned to use in meetings, the one that doesn't flinch, that makes grown men double-check spreadsheets. I asked them to resend the final settlement statement and include any notations regarding liens or financial encumbrances. The woman on the phone, polite but rushed, said she would have the documents over to me within an hour. I waited with the patience of someone who already knew what she was about to see. And there it was. Page 3, right at the bottom, a lien satisfaction, listed in my name, against a debt that had never belonged to me. It was dated 4 years prior and linked to a small business loan taken out through a regional credit union. The borrower of record, my father, the cosigner, me. I felt the blood drain from my face so fast I had to grip the kitchen counter just to stay standing. I had never cosigned anything. I had never signed a loan agreement, not even for a car that wasn't mine. I called the credit union next, sat on hold through 2 transfers and 1 accidental hang-up, and finally spoke to a manager who confirmed that the loan had been secured using my name and social security number, with forged documents. When I asked if that was even possible, She gave me a long pause before muttering something about internal investigation and legal recourse. But the money was paid now, but there wasn't anything they planned to do about it. I didn't go to my parents' house that night. I didn't even go the next day. I sat with that knowledge for 48 hours, doing nothing except breathing it in and letting it stain everything I had believed I was building. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the weight of how casually they had done it, how easily they had handed my future over to Melanie's disaster of a business, something she had launched with a boyfriend she broke up with after 6 months, and a logo she'd stolen off Pinterest. When I finally pulled up to the house, I didn't bother with pleasantries. I didn't even wait for the doorbell to finish ringing. My mother opened the door, already braced for impact, her eyes wide and wet. My father stood behind her, holding a coffee mug like it was a shield. "I know what you did," I said. That was all it took. My mother's mouth opened and closed. My father set the mug down and stepped forward, starting to speak, but I raised my hand and cut through whatever apology or justification he had been rehearsing. "You took out a loan in my name. You forged documents. You tied that debt to me for years without saying a word." My mother looked like she might crumble. "We were trying to help Melanie. She had no credit. We thought we could pay it back before I noticed," I snapped. "Before I sold the apartment and saw that you'd used me like a damn bank account." My father, to his credit, didn't try to deny it. He looked at the floor, hands in his pockets, that same cowardly silence he had always hidden behind. My mother stepped forward, but I stepped back. "You don't get to ask me for anything ever again," I said, my voice colder than I had ever heard it. "You don't get to act like this was a mistake. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. This was theft." She tried to speak, but I turned before she could finish. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I didn't even cry until I was back in my car, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding me to the planet. Back at the store, Olivia was waiting. She had a bottle of wine, a takeout bag, and that expression she wore when she knew. I was one wrong word away from snapping in half. I told her everything, every line, every document, every deceit. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She just poured the wine and said, "So what now?" I looked around the shop, at the shelves I had painted, at the tables I had assembled by hand, at the chalkboard sign out front that read, "Grand opening this Saturday," and I smiled, not a happy smile, not even a smug one, just a quiet, knowing curve of the mouth. "Now," I said. "Now I sell the building." Olivia blinked. "You're serious?" I nodded. "It's not for me anymore. It was never just for me. It was proof that I could build something without them, that I could start over. Now I know that I can." And 3 weeks later, I did. The sale closed on a Wednesday. Clean deal, no liens, no hidden signatures. I walked away with a solid profit and not a single regret. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't leave a forwarding address. 1 week after that, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address, no note inside, just a photograph. It was a slice of birthday cake. Vanilla, 1 candle, already half eaten. I stared at it for a long time. Then I slipped it into the drawer with my closing papers. Because sometimes you don't get closure. Sometimes you get confirmation. And that, I've learned, is enough.